No, we got another black game. Oh, gosh. I really was hoping we'd get a white game so I could play d4, but we got another d4. Oh, my gosh. That's pretty funny. We got 3 in a row and another London system. Okay, well, guess what? Of course, I could now play the King's Indian. I could showcase a different line, but let's see if I can get a chance. Thank you for the 300. Let's play the same line. I'm excited to see what this guy's going to play. Just to hopefully we'll get a chance to emphasize some of the concepts that we just talked about. So this is pretty exciting stuff. Let's go d5 and let's go c5. Maybe he'll take. We'll see what he plays. Knight f3. Okay. So knight f3. Yeah, knight f3 gives black more options than c3 does, but I don't think we should reinvent the wheel here. Let's still play knight c6. And if he goes c3, this will be a very similar position to what we just had. Bishop b5, okay. So bishop b5 is a little bit weird. Just a little bit weird. Because in the London, generally, you play c3 first. So there's a couple of options that we have at our disposal. We can play bishop d7. That's the sort of instinctual move, and it leads to a very solid position, I think. A lot of you guys should be seeing queen a5 check, and again, it doesn't win a bishop because of knight c3. But at this level, you sometimes do stuff, not because it wins material, but because it induces an undesirable move, okay? Now, what is the purpose of the London system as a whole? Let's deconstruct it for a second. The London revolves around the pawn on d4 being a stronghold for white. That pawn on d4 is mega defended when white plays c3. So, from a positional standpoint, queen a5 check is a tremendously helpful move. Why? Who can put the pieces of the puzzle together? Why would we want to induce knight c3? Well, obviously, we prevent him from playing c3. And that pawn on d4 turns from a weakness into a strength. Sorry, from a strength into a weakness. So let's play queen a5 check. In addition, the queen on a5 is very nicely placed. I mean, there's nothing wrong with putting the bishop under some pressure. And we'll have to play precisely in response to knight c3. So right now, we want to play actively. We don't want to go e6 because we're a little bit underdeveloped and he'll go knight e5. So how should we restrict the knight on f3 while also developing a piece? I'm basically giving it away, but I don't like knight e4 because I would prefer to emphasize the development. So let's go bishop g4. Yeah, this is a very typical way of developing. And we're putting pressure on the knight, which is in turn defending the pawn on d4. Okay, he takes, we take, that's nice. That leads to a very compact and a very nice pawn structure. I like this pawn structure. Okay, so we can take on d4. We don't necessarily need to do that. We can also just play e6 and work on the development of this bishop. On the other hand, one could make the case that e6 allows him to take on c5 and relinquish the pawn on d4. But on the other hand, is that really something we should be worried about? It gives away the whole center. So when in doubt, and by the way, rook b8, be careful, that bishop guards the square. When in doubt, keep the tension. Let him be the one to decide whether he wants to take or not. That's always going to be less of a headache than asking yourself the same question. On the third hand. No, you can say that in Russian. You can say on the second hand, on the third hand, etc. So here, another question. Should we take on f3 or should we drop the bishop back? Now, to answer that question, it is important to understand that dropping the bishop back, we should ask ourselves, is he realistically going to play g4? And the answer to that question is no. That's a tremendously weakening move. There's no reason to assume, there's no reason to be afraid of a move like this. So we definitely keep the tension here. He plays g4. And in a blitz game, I might have even captured on g4 and considered the piece sacrifice. But in this particular instance, I don't really want to do that. I want to play positionally. Let's drop the bishop back to g6. Why is g4 weakening? Well, because he's pushing a pawn out in front of his king. Knight e5. This looks intimidating for us, but it's not. It's a very surface level move. He's threatening the pawn on c6. All we need to do is defend that pawn. We got to be careful about how we defend it. Perhaps some of you are spotting queen b6, but that walks into the nasty move knight to a4. We have queen a6, but here would be a good time to apply the rule of piece value. You want to perform a task, any given task, with a piece of least possible value, which means rook c8. Come back to what I said earlier. Does this move look glamorous? No, but sometimes pieces got to do the dirty work, and there's nothing wrong with that. The rook is doing some dirty work. It's defending the pawn. It's not going to be doing it forever. Eventually, we're going to try to get rid of this knight, but for the time being, we need to get our pieces developed, and the rook's going to have to suck it up for a couple of moves. h4. Now this guy is playing actually very interesting style. So he wants to trap our bishop. Okay, so what's the general reaction to this kind of move? So h6 or h5. Yeah, h6 or h5. Either is fine. Of course, you could take on g6, but that's not something to be concerned about. We play fg, and he continues to weaken his king side. So this is going to come back to bite him, I think, in a couple of moves. g5. Now, but the guy is very fearless. I have to hand it to him. Now, we should take, for sure. For sure we should take, just to open up the h file. Yeah, this opens up a file to his king. So this is one of those games where it seems like he might be in charge because he's calling the shots so far. But once we end his initiative, it's going to be our turn. Okay, take on g6. All right, now it begins to be our turn. So we need to deconstruct this position and understand what our priorities are. We probably are not going to castle. We're probably going to keep our king in the center for the time being. Now, what do we want to achieve here? What's our goal? How do we make sure that the h-file works in our favor? Well, we need to get rid of his bishop, and to get rid of his bishop, we can play in a very simple way. We can just play bishop e7, and eventually we can try to move our knight from f6 and initiate the trade of bishops so that the h4 pawn loses its defender. That should be pretty sensible to everybody. It makes... Okay, and he actually just helps us do that. That is I think a mistake. I see what he's trying to do. He's trying to get his knight to f4. The guy is very, very strong, actually. He's stronger than his rating, for sure. But on the other hand, he allows us to go knight e4. However, on the third hand, if we calculate concretely, that's where I have to give my opponent some kudos. Knight e4, bishop e7, king e7, knight f4. And guess what? I mean, that pawn on g6 being hanging with a fork, that queen comes into g4. I'm a little bit concerned about that, so I don't want to do it. Let's hold off on knight e4. Now, does that mean we abandon the general idea? No. And this is sort of high-level thinking. A lot of the time, you would get frustrated in such a situation and say, well, we can't. That means we can't move our knight. But wait a second. All we discovered was that knight e4 is not a great move. But can we modify our plan? We can. We can go knight h5. I don't like this move from the perspective that it blocks the h-file. But piece placement is temporary. We will deal with that knight. It's far more important to accomplish the long-term priority of opening the h-file. Okay, knight g3. And, you know, we move the knight back, that's it. And the h4 pawn cannot be defended. So this difference between what's temporary, what's permanent is important here. Sometimes you got to break some eggs to make, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. And this is a good example of it. Okay, I'm going to speed up a little bit here. We're going to double the rooks. We're not going to relinquish control of the h-file. The guy is playing incredibly well, though, I have to say. So I'm speeding up just a little bit here. We've won a pawn. We have pressure down the h-file. And we have all of the positional advantages here. So black's got a great position. We just got to play precisely to carry this one home. If he plays queen d3... Okay, he goes c3. Now finally he plays that move. All right. I think that's a little bit too slow. Can we pounce? Do we have an opportunity to pounce on the initiative here? Can we rev up the engines here? Yeah, we can try knight g4, but again, I'm sorry, I keep faking you guys out. Let's start with the move queen b5. Let's start with this move. Attack the pawn and try to get the queen into a position where it can rejoin the game. I'll show you guys why I didn't like knight g4 after the game. He goes here. Okay. Let me think for a second. Yeah, we can do so many different things here. The problem is if we go c4, he takes it. Yeah, queen b3 was incredibly strong. Yeah, we're going to go c4 anyway. We're going to go c4 anyway. And he's going to go a4. He's going to find that move. No, he's going to go there. He's going to trade rooks, but that's going completely astray because now in the knight endgame we're up a pawn. And we're going to start the queenside pressure here. Let's go a5. Yeah, I'll explain after. Let's go b4. So what are we doing here? We are orchestrating the queenside pressure. Now let's bring our king into the center of the board. We can break through further with e5, just trying to grab space and break through in the center. Now we can try to get our knight over to a4, just like we would in the middle game. This is not going to be easy to win, by the way. This might be... this is close to a draw. But we're going to try to... yeah, that's a nice move. Yeah, the guy is... He's very good. Now I'm going to make a move here that looks really bad. I'm going to play b3. Why am I doing this? Why am I closing down the position? Because I'm trying to fix the weakness on b2. And the way that I'm going to attack this, he's actually helping me get the knight to d3. And that was a decisive mistake. Now he's busted because he cannot stop my knight from getting to d3. And the purpose of b3 is revealed. We have fixed his weakness and he won't be able to defend it. All right. No, at this point, like, these 1800s are actually very, very good. This guy was quite a bit underrated, but he's definitely human, and he just played well. Okay, knight d3. This is not minus 0.5. I mean, you know, I don't think so, at least. Boom. Knight h1 defense. Oh, yeah. That was a joke. Okay. Yeah, but king c1... Yeah, king c1, knight d3, and then I win the other pawn. King c1, I win the other pawn. So I win one of the pawns. So I was misleading. All right, so where should we go here? We can go back to a4 just to tie him down to the c3 pawn. And now we need to use basically the principle of two weaknesses. Like, the knight itself is not going to win you the game. We play to win the game. We need to get the king involved. How do we get the king involved? Well, we can play king e6, but there is an even more elegant way to get the king involved into the game. Does anybody see it? This is like a little bit creative. We want to get the king to e5, right? Well, what's stopping us? Obviously, it's the f4 pawn. That's why doubled pawns are so phenomenal in the endgame sometimes. If we didn't have a pawn on g7, this would be unthinkable. We would never allow him to get a passer. As it stands, we use one of the pawns as a battering ram just to, you know, shake off his defense. And now we go king e5. And the king has a very direct passageway to paradise. The moment he moves his knight, you know, we don't want to blindly go king e4. We spot the opportunity to take on c3. Zarathustra, is that important right now? All right, so what should we do? Where should we move the knight? Forky where? Yeah, knight d1 for sure. And then we want to take another pawn on e3. And that's a third one. And his position finally starts to crumble. Okay, so where should we go? We should go to e4. Okay, so how should we... You know, what should we do? How should we continue? There's a couple of options here. The key, you know, the one thing you should understand is, like, there's this common piece of advice, don't hurry in the endgame, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't push your pawns when you can. You know, you don't want to take forever, or he has his a pawn. He's going to push it. So don't dilly-dally forever. c3. Chris, I know, don't worry, guys. I know how much time I have. Trust me. Everything is under perfect control. Which pawn should we push now? Well, we can push b2. We can push d3. It doesn't really matter. We push d3. No, this isn't few. Like, trust me, it's not like it was a close call. Okay, so we should take the knight, of course, don't go b2. b2 check. And final sequence. Can anybody spot the most accurate winning idea here? It's not c2. There is an option here that leads to checkmate almost immediately. Does anybody see it? It's not king d2. Yeah, it's knight c4 and then c2 and b1 queen. So this is the most accurate. Knight c4, c2, and b1. Yeah, so c2 check. And b1 queen, checkmate. Okay. I was toying with you guys. I mean, I knew I had 5 seconds, but it was also mate. C1 knight, well, everything is made. Thank you for another 200 bits. Thank you, sir. Lots of good support today. We work our way back toward 5,000 subs. It's good to see. No, my accuracy, both were good. Okay. The engine wasn't a fan of either side during much of the endgame. Well, fair enough. So we had another London. Now in the last game, you guys will remember that c3 happened, followed by knight d2. That is that is considered to be the more accurate move order. And after knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5 is, I guess this is a move. I don't think it's the best. And I think there's a couple of, I honestly don't understand the c and d pushes by black in the opening. Well, one of the most basic sort of opening principles is that you need to control the center with your pawns. Are you familiar with that rule? Because that's sort of the basic opening rule. That's the whole premise behind moving your pawns out into the center of the board. If you're familiar with that, then these moves should make sense. We're basically grabbing space in the center to facilitate. Yeah, so that's all that we're doing. It's hard for me to go to that level, but if you're familiar with that, that's basically what we're doing here. Okay. So knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, queen a5 check, knight c3. So this is the concept of provoking. We are provoking knight c3 in order to soften up the d4 pawn. And at this level, these kinds of moves become very commonplace. You're not, blunders are less frequent. And so to win a lot of these games, you need to celebrate small victories. You need to provoke relatively small weaknesses, and you have to start becoming comfortable with these various positional considerations, such as, I'm getting his knight to c3. And a layman could look at this position and say, well, what the heck's wrong with bringing the knight out to its natural square? But if you were familiar with the London, you know that the pawn belongs on c3, not the knight. All right. Bishop b5 is not bad. I would say it's a little bit inaccurate. All right, so bishop g4. Yeah, I understand Stockfish. Stockfish might say bishop g4. Yeah, that also seems very sensible. I don't like to use the engine in these positions because I'm going instead for a conceptual illustration. This is not really like Jababa London. Why don't I like knight e4? I'm not sure where. So bishop g4. Okay, so bishop c6, bc. Bishop c6 was unnecessary. I think he should have probably castled. Oh, knight e4 here. Oh, sorry, knight e4 in this position. I got it. Yeah, so the reason I didn't like knight e4, ladies and gentlemen, is because of castling. And okay, black wins a piece, right? Knight takes c3, bc3, queen takes b5. So I'm just done, right? What am I missing here? What are we missing? Not rook b1, but white has an intermediate move. Which intermediate move does white have? Of course, he takes with check. bc, bc. Now, I understand that some of you are looking at this and saying, well, black's up a pawn. Like, why didn't you go for this? But that's exactly the thing. At this level, you cannot just look at the position and say, we're up a pawn, so we have a good position. You have to look at the other. You have to contextualize this. And what other considerations are? Well, clearly black is hugely lacking in development. We literally don't have a single piece developed. White has his entire army ready to rumble. This gets super nasty really fast. He's got the B file. Anybody should be able to see that white has huge compensation here. So, doing all of this for the sake of winning a pawn is just not something I consider to be worth it. And there's a lot of these layers, of consideration. Knight e4 looks very logical, but concretely, I didn't think it was that good. Bishop g4, I always like to prioritize development. All right. Well, chess is hard. Castles, e6. This is normal. h3, bishop h5. Yeah, so we could have taken on f3 here and essentially softened up the d4 pawn. Yes, well, as Emmanuel Lasker said, I spent the first half of my chess career learning rules and the second half unlearning them, to paraphrase. And yes, you could put it that way. At lower levels, it's all about mastery of fundamental principles, short calculation, tactical pattern recognition, and at higher levels, all of those things are absolutely true. They still decide games. But you can see these very subtle considerations start to creep in, such as when do you violate the rules? When do you find exceptions to the rules? You see these subtle considerations of provoking certain moves and weak pawns. One analogy that I heard this analogy from somebody, I thought it was very nifty, to demonstrate how the makeup of most chess games changes. From level to level. You can think of like a war. First time anybody's made a war analogy. You can think of a war, and none of what I'm about to say is aimed at, condescending to lower rateds or anything. I'm not trying to say your games are less meaningful, but it's just a way of understanding how things work, I think. So at a beginner level, you're basically throwing grenades at each other, and you're just, you're going after the opposing army with knives and trying to stab the enemy forces. And then the higher rated you get, the more sort of localized the fighting becomes. At 1400 level, you might be launching long-distance weapons at the other army without actually engaging in hand-to-hand combat. And then at 1900 level, you might start engaging in cyber warfare. There's no guns that are actually fired. Everything happens through computer channels. And then at master level, you're engaging in thought. You're trying to control the thought of your enemies, or you're launching bioweapons or something. The fighting gets more sophisticated and less noticeable. Sorry to spend so much time on this analogy, but that's just one way of looking at it, I think. Yeah, diplomacy. Diplomacy is used. So the playing field becomes more narrow, and it's less, the game's decided by a blunder or by some bomb that falls. It's much more sort of subtle, specific. Okay. Bishop h5, g4. Espionage, awesomeness, thank you for the prime. Why didn't I sacrifice on g4? Because we get two pieces for the piece, which is nice. 2 pawns for the piece, which is nice. What I didn't like is that we have no other pieces on the king side. And the queen is, on the other side of the board. White can go king g2, very typical move. Reinforce the knight. The queen is capable now of moving away. I didn't see a good way to continue the king side attack. Yes, the king is very weak. I think we've got compensation, but I kind of started not liking it. Okay? So that's the bottom line. The center pawns are like the UN, exactly. I like that you guys have taken this analogy for it. So bishop g6, knight e5, rook c8. And I'm going to be completely honest, I missed h4. I just didn't... it didn't register that he had this idea. And I want to give my opponent a lot of credit for, playing so boldly. He's pushing pawns on the side of the board where he has his king. That's pretty admirable. I think that he started only going wrong here. I think g5 was unnecessary. Thank you. I appreciate it. Oh, thank you. I think G5 was unnecessary. He went a little bit too far. He opened the H file for me. What should he have done? I think he should have taken. And then I don't think I was lost. Wait, Andres. I don't think I was lost necessarily in this game, but I guess I'm wrong. I mean, if you're checking with an engine, I'm no match for that. So we would have gone king f7 here, and I think black is better in this position. He's got a ton of weaknesses. We have c4, but you know, the game goes on. I think g5 is a little bit going overboard. So takes. Whoa, Jam with a 10, and the fireworks continue. Thank you. Wowza. 4 a.m. hype. I didn't get the sense that I was worse either, but again, the engine knows best. That you guys are a lot more attached to checking the engine eval than I am, to be honest. And that's the reason I don't check the engine eval, because I might have been worse in a specific moment. Another 10! Damn, girl! Damn, that is crazy. The guy is on fire. All right. Well, before I was rudely interrupted by loads of gifted subs. Now, basically, okay, so let me make this clear. Using an engine to detect mistakes is great, but I would caution you not to get too worked up about these evaluations. Like, oh, I was, you know, plus 0.3, or I was a little bit worse, a little better. You should use the engine to look at big mistakes rather than try to like overanalyze and say, oh, you know, I made a small inaccuracy here. Because at that point, you can obsess forever over tiny inaccuracies. So bishop e7, knight e2, knight h5. The thing is, also the engine might mislead you, and you know, it might crater your confidence when in reality you played a very nice game. Thank you, Jim gifting to Marius Margulis. He's creeping up on 35 gifted. That's crazy. It might crater your confidence and say, oh, you know, I made all these mistakes, all these inaccuracies, when you might have played an excellent game. So just, you know, put things in proper context here. All right, so bishop e7, king e7. And again, why didn't I play knight e4? Because after bishop e7, king e7, knight f4, that pawn on g6 is hanging. We can't play rook h4. We get forked. And if we try to defend this pawn, then he brings his queen into the game, and all of a sudden, all these pawns are hanging. C takes d instead of knight h5, I was thinking. Yeah, we could have taken, but what does this really give us? Engel, thank you for the prime. I don't know what this gives us. I'm not sure how this changes the makeup of the position or who this benefits. 5 gifted from Jam. He doesn't stop. Holy smokes. Thank you. Yeah, so anyways, knight g3. We drop the knight back to f6. And now, and I think knight g3 was a mistake. What should white have done here? Well, he should have recognized that one of my ideas is to move the knight back. Curious chimpanzee with a 5. Whoa. We've got tons of hype here at 4 a.m. All right. So what should white have done here? How does white prepare for the opening of the h-file? And think about, okay, we want to defend the h-pawn potentially, so what should we do? This is king g2 is excellent. Knight f6. And, okay, knight f6 is bad because he still has knight f4. But even if he didn't, he would be able to play rook h1. So you're always sort of asking yourself, not only what is my opponent's threat, but how does my opponent want to reposition his pieces? The more questions like that you ask yourself, the greater the possibility that you'll be able to find moves like king g2. Knight g3, knight f6. King g2 he plays now, but it's a little bit too late. We win the pawn. We get the pressure down the h-file, and we're in great shape. Now, he played c3, and here, at first I was going to play knight g4. And this looks incredibly good, right? Because it looks like we're threatening rook h2, but you know what the problem is here? The problem is that the queen is so far away from the action. And the rook and the knight kind of bite off more than they can chew. So I was worried here that he would go queen to f3, bringing his queen into the defense, and preparing to get his rook involved with rook h1. And if we give this check automatically, then after king g1, look at what happens. The knight and the rook have no pawn support. If only we had a pawn on f5 or an h5, we would have been in tremendous shape. But that knight is now dead meat. I mean, we have to go back to h4. We lose the knight. So that's why I dialed it back and decided to go queen b5 first. There was a very specific idea. The idea is that if he goes b3, which I was hoping for, now we go knight g4, queen f3. And if you compare the two positions, the queen here is on b5, on the other line it was on a5. Well, does that matter? Who can tell me why this does matter? Yeah, well, think about where the queen... One good way of thinking about this, where can the queen go? It holds f1, but it can go to d3. That's the bottom line. It can go to d3. It can centralize itself, attack c3, and participate very directly in the attack. So you really have to, you know, take this apart. Where can the queen go where it couldn't go when it was on a5? And hopefully that makes sense. So that was the idea. I was trying to make a move that preliminarily prepares for knight g4. But to my opponent's credit, queen b3 is very strong. And this creates a nasty little situation because if I don't do anything, then he simply takes on b5 and takes on c5. That's a free pawn. I decided to go c4 ultimately. But after the queen trade, I think that had he played the correct move, white would have probably not been worse. The correct move, to find the correct move, you must realize the rook on h4 is very misplaced. It was very well placed earlier with the queens on the board, but now that there's no attack, it's totally irrelevant, and white strikes with a4. That's a pretty obvious move. I was surprised he missed it. It's natural. And apparently he's slightly better. Now, how should black respond to this? I was going to go b4 and sacrifice a pawn to keep the rook and the file closed. And I think this is double-edged. I mean, either side can still win. We've got a very nice pawn here. He's got weaknesses. We've got weaknesses too. He can go knight e2, knight f4 and stuff. So white is definitely not worse here. I didn't see a good move in this position, honestly. And I could have maybe dropped my queen back to a6. Yeah, well, what about a6? Well, we don't want to play a6 because look at what happens. He's got the full a file. He can give us a check. He can even go rook a5 and pick this pawn off. And he totally dominates over the queen side. That's kind of a worst case scenario. Queen b6. Oh, yeah, that's a great example of trading on your own terms, right? You drop the queen back, and that was the move that I was looking for. You trade on your own terms. And if he takes on c5, then I guess we can take on c5, and this check is not scary. We just cover it with a knight, and we're still up a pawn. That's a very deep move that I should have seen. I should have seen this move. Oh, queen c7. Wow. So it's saying just give that pawn up and go aim for the king. So maybe that gave the biggest advantage. But that and queen b6 makes sense. That's a findable move. That's definitely a findable move. It just didn't occur to me for some reason. It didn't. I only thought about taking the queen or forcing the queen trade. And once he goes rook h1, this leads to a very nasty knight endgame where not only are we up a pawn, but we have this massive queenside pawn pressure, which results in the ultimate creation of weaknesses. He goes a3, we go b3. And our idea now is to bring the knight over to a4 and tie him down to the b2 pawn, and then bring our king over essentially to the other side of the board and start attacking his pawns on the other side. He's going to get overextended here. I think this is probably winning already. D takes c5 exacerbates the situation because the knight now jumps into d3, and he can't defend both of these pawns at once. f4, knight d3. Thank you, Harris 3H, for the 2 months. And this game is over now after knight d3. I mean, we made a nice move g5, fg king e5, and then get the king involved. Fix the weakness just means, it doesn't mean fix as in it was broken, but it means just to stabilize it, like not to let it move. Like fix it as in make it immobile, cement it. Yeah, basically. All right, can't you play d4? Well, d4 is worse because that allows him to create a protected passed pawn. g5, by contrast, doesn't let him do that because we still have this pawn. Thank you, Fan, for the 12 months. Thanks. You have to be creative. Yeah, you absolutely do. And thanks for the 1 year. Yeah, so after that, we go king e5, knight c3. We drop the knight back. Well, we know we actually win the pawn. And now we have this massive pawn army, which we convert very easily. c3, d3, takes, b2, knight c4. Even more accurate than going c2, although that's also possible. Generally in such positions, thank you, Defender of Time, for the year. We want to give away as many pawns as it takes and promote the one that, that advances the fastest. Yeah, and this is just checkmate. Thank you, Lether, for the prime. Oh my god. This is crazy. I'm loving this. All right. Just 1 second here. Yeah, the London is... no, that's T. The London is incredibly popular these days, but it's... yeah, it's good for some players. It's very good for some players. Thank you for the 200 bits, Fen. Yeah, it was a cool nuance. I mean, king e6 was totally winning as well. But, people up Eric Rosen, it's become very, very popular, and it's a good system. I'm very cautious of recommending it to people because it can become kind of almost an addiction, like you just play the same line over and over again and stuff like that. So you got to be careful. Do you have any old Soviet chess books on you? I do. I actually brought one home to Charlotte. I brought a so in the 70s, 60s, 70s, the Soviet Chess Federation released a yearbook, sort of a yearly compilation of articles and opening articles and tournament reports, and it was like super high quality. It was hardcover, like incredible. There were articles by all these GMs that were commissioned to write that kind of stuff. So I brought one of those books with me to use in my lessons and stuff. But I think I'm gonna be back tomorrow, guys, and we're gonna do more speedrunning. So